I'm Matthew McCabe. Welcome to Miracle Voices. Each episode, we will be delving into stories of forgiveness, healing, and transformation that have come about from integrating the principles of the book A Course in Miracles. If you want to learn more about A Course in Miracles, visit www.acim.org. If you'd like to visit the Miracle Voices site, please go to www.miraclevoices.org. If you feel inspired to make a love offering, please visit us at miraclevoices.org/donate. All donations go to support the work of the Foundation for Inner Peace, the publisher of A Course in Miracles. Now here's your program. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Miracle Voices. I'm pleased to welcome my co-host, Judy Scutch-Whitson, to the show. How you doing, Judy?
I'm doing really well today, Matthew. I'm so glad we're back together again.
Me too. And also our guest today, Ronnie Whitson. Hi, Ronnie.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Judy. Hi.
Hello.
You know, you guys immediately, or you girls, both have the same last name. Everybody's dying to know, is this Judy's sister? Are you related?
No, we're not. Not by blood, but by love.
Okay. And the more I learn about Ronnie's role here, I can't help but think that we're going to have to call this episode Connecting the Dots or 2020 Hindsight or something like that, because it's so clear Ronnie's role with the Course, looking backward as you both explain it. But at times, it was probably difficult to see that when you were living in it and looking forward, I imagine. Is that right?
Yes, I never had any idea where my life was heading. And it isn't even, it's only when you look back, when you realize that all those dots are what led you to where you are right now. And as you live longer, right, Judy?
Right.
Those dots get more and more and more, but they started and then they just continued on the incredible journey that both Judy and I have had. Judy more than me, but I've been fortunate enough to join along the way.
How long ago did this all happen to you? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
You mean the actual beginning, or
I mean when you were born?
Oh, when I was born. That's that's a lot of years ago.
Well, you just had a birthday.
I just had a birthday, and it is. I'm 7 years behind you. Okay.
How do you like that?
I got to start answering my age that way.
That's right.
I'm 90, everybody. You figure it out.
do the math. Last week I was 82. This week I'm 83. So that's a long way back to remember all the steps that lead you along your lifeline. So
I mentioned it because so many people think all of the things that people do that they don't know well happen by some kind of magic, or it just happens and it doesn't really impress them. But today, since we're going to be talking about your role with the Foundation for Inner Peace, it's very clear it didn't happen by magic, but was guided by the Holy Spirit, and that you fit right into the plan that was given to us, so that we were all chose identically and for different roles, but for the same reason: to accept the atonement for ourselves, to practice the Course, and to learn what it was saying. We must have asked at some level. I think we all asked, and so therefore we're here right now. But you weren't born in this country, that we know.
No, I was born in South Africa. Came to this country when I was 20. So most of my life was spent in South Africa, and that's where I met my husband Ivor when we were both in high school, and he left South Africa to go play soccer in London, and I followed him, and then he left London to go to visit Canada. He arrived there. I think he says he had $20 in his pocket. And he got a job working in a uranium mine in northern Canada. And I followed him again. And we were married in Elliott Lake, which is a small uranium mining area. And we were married in the basement. The minister's house had an unfinished basement. And we were married in the basement because no church had been built yet. So that's my beginnings. And from then, I was fortunate enough, we moved to Toronto, where I started modeling, and an angel named Lillian used to come up from New York on weekends, and she would work with different studios in Toronto, and she managed to get me a contract with her studio in New York, and I was to work 16 hours a week, 4 hours for 4 days, and the contract was for 4 weeks. So I would go down on a Sunday night and fly back to Toronto on Friday. And that led me, both Ivor and I, to move down to New York. Okay.
Was the contract for uranium?
The contract that Lillian got for me?
Yeah, the angel that came to you. What was the contract you signed?
Oh, sorry. Lillian worked as a stylist for a photographic studio in Manhattan. So the contract that she got for me was to work for the photographic studio in New York. So that was the beginning of my modeling in New York.
So you went from South Africa to England to Canada, where Ivor was working the uranium, to New York.
He was a hard rock miner.
To New York to become a model. And you won't say it, Ronnie. I know you'll never say it, but Ronnie was a top fashion model, what we called a cover girl back in our days.
Right. That sounds a lot better than what it was, but it was a lot of fun. And
so this is a glamorous lifestyle. We have a footballer and a model, and now they're coming down to New York City. And what happened then?
Well, after modeling for a number of years, I didn't know what I would do after modeling was over, because as you age, you stop working. I hadn't stopped yet, but Ivor suggested to me that the way my mind works, I might be interested in computers. And it was a good time. Modeling was slow in the summer, so I agreed with him, and I went and took a class in a modeling language called BAL, and the class was held on Times Square, which was kind of a strange place to be going for computer lessons. But that was the beginning of my move from my modeling life into my computer life.
What were computers like then, Ron?
They were huge. I mean, they would fill city blocks. You would walk into the computer room of Time Life, and you'd see what seems like almost, which had to be about 100 or more disk drives, which were big, in big, like 4x4 containers. And they'd stretch right across the floor of the computer room. And the computer room itself had to be specially air conditioned. It had to have a raised floor so that all the cabling could fit underneath. What fits on desk, no, not even on our desks, in our hands today, would take up the whole city block. So
that is so extraordinary to think of that. And I know most people sharing this podcast with us today are a good bit younger than we are and don't even think about when computers took up a whole city street.
right.
And here they go around with the nanos and the cell phones and the iPods. And that's a life that is lived in our hand and in our pocket. There, he had to go through all kinds of strange doors and passes and things to get into what looked like a mile city block just to go to your desk to do your work. That in itself is incredible. The reason I'm stressing it is because the work that you were getting into at that time, and so conveniently and wisely and presciently studying, was, of course, the wave of the future. Was going to make today possible, was going to allow us to have A Course in Miracles in 28 languages around the world, and allow us to have a WE edition, a web edition, where with one click, we get the whole course, we could search it, and we could also be getting it in all the languages. It just boggles the mind how far you've come, and every step along the way you were there. So tell us a little bit more about the progression.
Well, my involvement working for the foundation started with you. One day you handed me a stack full of diskettes. They were 5-inch diskettes that had very little data on them. And you handed me this stack without any expectations or any directions, just kind of handed it over to me. And I took it home and then picked up. I had the 3 blue books, so I picked up one of the three books, and I started checking the data on the disk against the then printed course, and I found the digital copy was filled with errors. It was really, whoever had keyed it in had done an amazing service, but they really weren't very accurate. So I found myself proofreading all 3 books, and I went through them about 3 or 4 times. And as I was proofreading, I would be proofreading with one side of my mind, checking that the words were right, and then I would switch over to the other side, where I would be looking at the beauty of the words, and that I would go on page after page, and then I would say, oh God, I got to go back because I haven't been proofreading. Because as you're reading and listening to the beauty, the message in the course, you forget, your mind isn't checking accuracy. So
did I ever tell you how it came to be even put on discs?
I never knew that story.
Yeah, my husband, Bill Whitson, who had been a military man for 23 years and was quite used to things that come up quickly and become all of a sudden part of our culture, first noticed discs. I'll call them discs. I don't know what else to call them. I think in his conversations with you, he knew all about computers, mainframe particularly.
Yeah.
And he saw an ad in Palo Alto newspaper, and it said that a woman was willing to type up your print copy and put it on discs. And I said to him, look, here's an ad about discs. Does this mean anything? He said, let's call her. And he called her up, and she said, that's exactly what she did. It was the first translation from print to put onto disc so they could be working with the next, hopefully with the next, I guess, generation of computers. In any event, she was called Miracle Typing. Miracle Typing. And that's the reason I found her. I saw the word miracle. I stopped reading and we got her right away.
That is, I have never heard that story. That fills in a blank. Like, how did Judy have those discs in her hand? And then why did she hand it to me? but now we know it was what's, well, it was you starting seeing the word miracles. And so that was one of the dots, Matt, which we just added another dot to our story.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have this like latent savant computer skills that you weren't really aware of. You're like an archaeologist with your little paintbrush dusting away your skills. You're finding more and more computer skills that are underneath the surface, and it leads to more discoveries and what you move forward with Centerlink. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Whit first, and then very fast followed by Ivor, had this idea, and Judy, please correct me because you know more about Whit's dream than I do, even though I've heard it. But he wanted to build a database of all the books, the books connected to mind, body, and spirit that had ever been published. And he saw the possibility of computers being able to be used. You set up a database with all these books, and then once you have the database, then people could access and do searches and do what they're doing today. But this was really before this all happened. Databases were in their infancy, although there were quite a few around. But he and Ivor then got together and decided to set up a company which was named Centerlink. And Centerlink was set up specifically to set up a database of.
But it was interesting then, Ron, in the database idea that I was going to say came to it. He was another one of us who was given his role very carefully and very, very well spelled out from, even though he didn't know what it was. He saw the course as the centerpiece of a huge database,
right,
with all sorts of metaphysical books and all sorts of psychoneuroimmunology, all the different fields he felt connected to the mind and therefore led to the spirit. And he thought it'd be wonderful to put together a company building a database like that, which of course no one knew how to do really. Yeah. And he and I may have been the first ones we knew about who did anything like that. And so the Whitson not brothers became like the Whitson brothers.
That's right. We should have named it the Whitson brothers, not Centerlink.
Very, very clearly they were meant to be together, just as Ronnie and I were meant to be together. We were the Whitsons by marriage.
That's right.
We were still part of the Whitsons. And we worked together very closely. Therefore, they saw and met our friends as we met their friends and family. And a lot of our friends, of course, were new course people. And, of course, amongst them were Ken and Helen, Ken Wapnick, Helen Schuckman, Bill Thedford, scribes of the course. These were all the early days of the course. We all had ideas like this because we were sort of left on our alone for a little. Not that we weren't told exactly how to publish the course and what to do with it, but we always had, our minds were still wandering in all sorts of other directions. And I realized that was our coming together time when we saw that it was for much, much more than we thought. And then I think your next step, correct me if I'm wrong, was getting to know Ken Wapnick even better and what resulted from that.
That's right. Just one more thing about Whit. I think his dream was what helped. His dream became a reality because everything he dreamt of started taking place. You know, being involved with Ivor, who at that time headed up a major publishing company in Manhattan, and this ex-model who, for some reason had some computer knowledge, and everything you had in California that was already set up, but it all kind of started coming together. His big his big dream. So, and Ken was, of course, he was a major part of this. And I started working with him. You set up a meeting between Ken, that Ivor and I should meet Ken and Gloria, because they lived very close to us over here. And at first, when we visited them, they knew very little about computers. It had just kind of entered their lives, but they weren't totally trustful of what the future could be with computers. But I remember standing, once they moved from close to us to Roscoe, and I think that's where Ken's computeries knowledge grew, and he saw how it could be used in his work. And then one day I was standing with him, and he said to me, he asked whether I would do a concordance. He said he would like to have a concordance. I think he put it that way. And would I be able to do it? I had no idea what a concordance was. It was a word that sounded very much like dictionary to me. But I found myself saying, yes, I would do the concordance, which sounded like a big enough challenge. And then he kept quiet for a little while, and he said, oh, and before you do a concordance, you'll have to number all the sections, the subsections, the chapters, and the sentences in the course. And I remember, I remember thinking, this is impossible, because at that point there was none of the software that's available today that would allow you to do easily. But I found myself saying that I would do that. And that's what began, for me, a 7-year journey doing the concordance. When I talked to Rosemary, who worked with Ken, she said it took 5 years, but really it took 2 years for me to figure out the technical way of how this could be done. And then Rosemary and Ken became more involved as the content had to be looked at and changes made. And they weren't really part of the struggle that I had for 2 years to figure things out. I mean, in a concordance, and Matt, just for you, for you to answer the question you had earlier, was in a concordance, you have every word in the book is listed. And then what you have to do, and this was a big struggle, was you list the word, and then on either side of the word, on both sides, you have the word in context. So you would have, say, 20 characters or 25 characters to the left of that word, and then 25 characters to the right, which sounds very easy, except when you realize that if you go to the left of the word, you might be at the beginning of a sentence, and then you would go into the end of the previous sentence, which wouldn't make sense. So you had to come up with a way to get the relevant characters on both sides. And as always happens with all the work I've ever done with the course, is somebody comes up who would work with you and resolve a challenge. And somebody, and I don't have his name, Dale, I don't remember his last name, but somehow I met Dale online. I don't know, he sent an email. I don't know how he came to me, but he was able to do the programming, and we figured out you have to use a punctuation. You have to look at, you have to go to the left, count the characters until you hit, say, a comma, you stop, You go to the right, hit until you hit another comma, you stop again. Then you go on the other side and you go and maybe you're lucky enough you hit a period. So you know you've ended a sentence, the earlier sentence, and you stop completely and then bring all the other characters from the right. I mean, that was a mind-boggling thing. And I had no idea how to do it. And Dale did it. I mean,
so even something as complex as that, someone appeared, an angel appeared, a waiting course angel appeared to help you along and help you do it. Well, Ronnie, those people who have indeed owned and used the concordance, and they'd be the same kind of people who would use a concordance, say, for Shakespeare, or maybe they'd use a concordance for biblical study. Things are that rich in material and that important to have concordances to them. Not everything has its own concordance, not necessary, thank goodness. But I wondered when you and Ken and the group were doing that, do we really need a concordance, taking Ronnie away from 7 years of work with us? Well, that wasn't true. You were doing work with us at the same time. It turned out to be extremely important. And while reading the concordance and doing the concordance and all the other work, I imagine you started to get an idea of what the course was talking about.
It burned itself into my mind. I often think I've learned the course not by study, as so many people have. I've learned it by osmosis. It's just something that happened to me along the way. It's all those times when I would proofread and I'd get lost. My thoughts would just take me elsewhere, and I would be reading the beauty and the message. And then I'd go back and do my job, do the proofreading or the typesetting or what else. So it's been a long journey of learning the course. And I said to my daughter that I came in through the back door. She says, "Mom, don't say back door, say side door. Back door doesn't sound good." Okay. So I really
you may think it was a side door or a back door.
Yeah.
I think you came in from above.
Yeah.
I love the idea that different people learn the course in different ways. And yours was one of the most unique ways I heard about. And I didn't even know about it. This sounds strange because I've known Ronnie for over almost 40 years. I didn't even know that Ronnie didn't even think that she ever studied the course. I studied the course. You've been through it more than any other person, including Helen. How could you not learn the course? I didn't think of it as learning, you said. I thought of just going along and doing my job. Well, your job was doing that too. And it was very charming and had a lot of insouciance in it, which made me realize what an enormous job you have done with us, the Foundation for the Peace, and how grateful we all were to love you and to have you with us, because never did you think that you knew so much more than anyone else. You always felt you knew less, when it wasn't true at all. All the translations and everything that goes to print, Ronnie had to do with. Can you imagine, from the very beginning, all the print Ronnie was involved. I have a question for you now, unless you want to add some other things, because it is, after all, a podcast about forgiveness. And I was wondering, do you have anything to tell us in what way your personal life changed through, let's not say the practice of the course, let's say through the osmosis of the course?
Right. I think one of the biggest challenges I had, both growing up and in later years, was my father. He was I don't know if you want to say I don't have to use an adjective. I just say he was an alcoholic. And it affected me tremendously as I was growing up. And not only did it affect me, but I saw it affecting my mother, who was the sweetest, kindest person on earth. And to see what she was put through because of his alcoholism really made a tremendous impact on me. I didn't realize how angry I was at him until he had died, because then I thought I would think of him with love and everything that I thought I felt for him. But I found that it was mixed up with a lot of anger and disappointment. And I didn't, if I grew up with an alcoholic father today, I would probably know more about alcoholism being a disease and be more understanding as I went through the daily, waking up from early morning. He would start drinking before he got out of bed, I think. But I think if I had more knowledge about alcoholism, I would have thought of him kinder growing up. And it was only if I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't recognize that he had a disease that and that he needed to be loved and not to be hated for what he was doing. So what I found actually was in a conversation with you, Judy, when I one day said how much I hated the fact that I thought of my father with anger and not with love. And you gave me a good talk on forgiveness, which I always remember. But in addition to the talk you gave me, I watched you over the years with I don't know how many people who gave you every reason to not forgive. I mean, things were done and said to you, especially during those horrible years of the when the course was, when litigation was going on. So much was said and done in those years, and I remember you got email and comments on the internet were made, and not once did you ever respond with anger. You just absorbed what was happening, accepted it, and forgave. And I know you worked at that forgiveness. It's not as though you just sat there and said, "Oh, I'll forgive everybody. They can do and say what they want." Every time there was a need for you to forgive somebody, you worked at it. It might not have worked the first time you tried, and I know some challenges took you longer, and probably maybe you're still working on some. I'm not sure. But watching you as an example of you are forgiveness embodied. I mean, it might sound strange, but I learned as much from you as I did from reading A Course in Miracles. It's just who you are, and you spread that feeling of forgiveness in everything you do. So
it's lovely for you to say that, Ronnie, and it's very delightful to hear, because I know we all are each other's helpers. We are the mighty companions that walk along, helping each other over the way when we ourselves are just learning how and have plenty to forgive. But I think once I mentioned to you that Bill Thetford's favorite lesson was forgiveness is the key to happiness. And you said, why don't you record it? And Bill was still alive, and it turned into a DVD that we distribute with Bill's voice on it. And his voice was quite soothing, delightful, and calm. And so hearing from him, forgiveness is the key to happiness, and that lesson always helps me even now when I have to remember that I have forgotten to forgive. We're always in the forgiveness mode in spirit because that is the way home. But in ego, we managed to block it out a bit. And you had said something about how you absolutely hated your father when you were younger and you were glad to get away from home at a young age to avoid what was going on in the family. And yet, when I see the life that has gone by and recognize that for many years, both your parents you brought from South Africa to New York to live with you, and that you took care of them. And how did you feel about him when he died?
I have to say that even while I hated my father's alcoholism all through life, from being, I'm sure from the first time I realized that he was not always the same person. But even though I hated that side of him, I loved him. I mean, and I don't mean I love just saying the word, but I really, really loved my father and hated him more because of his alcoholism, which is a strange way of putting it.
It isn't so strange because you're a few steps ahead of people in many ways that the love was already exposed.
Yeah.
You already knew the love and wished and hoped that he wouldn't be the way he seemed to be through his ego personality, which was unfortunately an addiction.
Right.
But I remember when you said to me that you were bringing your parents over to live with you. I wondered how that would happen. How many years did they live with you?
Oh, they lived with us. I think it was maybe 10 years or so.
10 years in your house.
Yes.
And how beautifully you took care of the two of them was a lesson to me and those around you, your daughter, I'm sure, and everybody who knew you well, to see what a difficult man he was and how lovingly you treated him. That's forgiveness. Right. This forgiveness, the Course mentions someplace, and I don't have the quote in my mind, so please forgive me, those of you who want the quote. I'll get it if you ask. Forgiveness silently stands by and does nothing. It waits for your invitation.
Right.
And it seems to me that is a very good example of it. Was always standing by silently, and the invitation was there. So finally, you could say you only loved him.
Right. It took many. After he died, I think I just ignored the fact. Not ignored the fact. I tried to put aside the fact that I didn't think of him totally of love. When I would think about him, the anger would kind of surface more than the love. And that's when I realized that I needed to work at it. And it took a lot of thought and letting go, and remembering the good parts. And they overtook any bad parts. So
Zephyr used to call that celestial remembering.
Yeah.
I like that, or celestial forgetting.
That's right.
In other words, you're letting the higher help you do it. And that's the most important thing of all, because you couldn't do it yourself. And you let it happen. You let it happen with you. You were willing to. You certainly were very much present. Only sometimes the final steps is very hard to take. And all you have to do is say, please help me.
Right. I still slip. Every now and then I think son of a bitch, but then I realize that is behind me, and it almost becomes laughable because you remember the anger with some joy. I mean,
yeah,
which is a strange way of putting it, but you can't push it away completely, but you can look at it with a little bit of laughter.
Matthew, what
Yes.
do you think as a sum up of what we have been enjoying here with Ronnie?
I was wondering because you heard me, I was giggling in the background here and there because Ronnie's getting asked to do things that are extremely technically challenging and daunting, seemingly out of the blue, and then you just find yourself saying yes. Like, will you take on this huge endeavor? Yes, I'll do that. And it's like, or did you find yourself saying like, why did I say yes to that? Or did you feel like a current behind you? Like, this is something I'm supposed to say yes to?
I just thought, I kind of thought, what have you committed to? Because I had no idea what the first steps would be. I mean, but then it became a challenge. You know, how do you renumber the sentences? How do you renumber? I mean, paragraphs were easy. Sentences were the problem. And then, but I think the challenge is the technical challenge of needing to figure something out. That is what I thought of more. And I didn't realize it was going to take 7 years. Right? You asked when I first made that commitment to Ken, I think part of me wasn't angry. It was I was just stunned. I was kind of didn't know where to begin. You know, not only the numbering, but then the concordance almost in the same breath. Ken had said both those things, so it was a feeling of where do I go now? You know.
And there was a teaching involved that you had no idea of. Right. If you were to tell someone today, for instance, or someone happens to be listening to this podcast, that Ken taught you privately for 7 years.
That's right. We spent many hours up in Moscow. Ivor and I would drive up. Ivor would go and do whatever he would do, and Ken and I would sit in a room and we'd talk. So that was a gift in itself.
Yeah, well, looking back on it as the time seems to be for me now, and sooner or later it's going to get to be a time for you. It's so full of wonder,
yeah,
and so full of awe that these incredible opportunities presented themselves to us, that we were somehow or other aware enough to take them on and to follow them, must have meant that there was something in us or built in us that had made a promise. I could only think that it was a continuation of, I know not what and can't explain it, but I sure do hope it continues.
Right. It has continued. Right.
What a beautiful story, Ronnie. You're kind of assembling all of these analog elements from the old world and taking them over a bridge to this new digital world that none of us really know how big it would become and how important. And now we can search for A Course in Miracles online and find the exact passage. And none of us even think about how it got there or how it was assembled or how this concordance happened. But thank you for your part in that. It really became clear that, we can look at it and see 2020 hindsight now, but I could definitely imagine that not being clear back then.
Right. I like to take it into the future and think that sometime in the way in the future, people are going to be looking back on this time, and this is going to be the beginning of whatever is happening then. So, I mean, it's almost like the journey has just begun. It continues, and it's going to continue way into the future. And who knows what technology is going to come that's going to make technology as we know today seem to be obsolete.
Oh yeah.
So it's the course will continue.
And if the forgiveness is at the heart of it.
That's right.
Who knows what can change? Our minds.
Well, Ronnie, one thing you had mentioned to Judy and I before is that Whit said something to you once that he had a message for you. Maybe you could share that story before we can close.
Right. Well, I had not met Judy yet. Whit had just come into our lives, thanks to another Whitson who introduced Ivor and Whit to each other. And Whit came to visit us. We were living in Tarrytown on the East Coast, and Whit came from California. And first time I met him, he came to stay in our house, and we went out for dinner. And we had a very nice, we were eating away, and then suddenly Whit looked at Ivor and I, and he said, I bring you a message from Jesus. And that's all he said. He didn't follow up with any explanation. Ivor and I didn't ask him. We didn't say, what do you mean? We just kept on eating as though nothing had happened. And it was after Whit left the next day, I said to Ivor, what did he mean? And we kind of shrugged our shoulders and had no idea. And then not a few days later, maybe a couple of weeks later, 3 books arrived in the mail, 3 big blue books. Whit had sent us what was then the 3-book Course in Miracles. No explanation, no message. They just arrived in the mail, and I looked at them, put them on the bookshelf, and then looked through them and started trying to read and couldn't get into it. And then a number of years later, at one of the Centrelink meetings, which we had in Tiburon, I was lucky enough to be sitting next to Bill Thetford. And it was a breakfast. And I said to him, I have the book on my bookshelf, but I have no idea. I don't know how I can't get into reading it. And he said, well, just open the workbook and start at the beginning. And that was his only answer. So those are 2 stories, but they were joined, and they joined everything else that followed.
That's good. I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah.
Well, Judy, do you have any thoughts before we close?
I think we have covered so much here, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some questions. And if there are a few questions, Ronnie, would you be willing to answer them?
I'd love to, Judy.
All right.
Oh, great.
So anyone who wants to write to Ronnie in care of us, it would be Miracle Voices, Ronnie Whitson. Is that correct, Matt?
You can just go to miraclevoices.org, and there's a contact tab there, and just fill out the form, and we'll make sure that Ronnie gets that.
Certainly will. Well, it's been delightful being with the 2 of you, and I can't imagine how it could be more so. So thank you so much, ever so much.
Yes, Ronnie, thank you for your miracle voice. And as always, Judy, thank you.
And thank you, Matt and Judy, for being.
Thanks so much for listening today. Please subscribe to Miracle Voices by hitting the subscribe button on your podcast app. If you are enjoying these conversations, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. And lastly, please visit us at miraclevoices.org and join our newsletter so we can stay connected. Until the next podcast, I want to leave you with my favorite Course quote, "When you want only love, you will see nothing else."